Hello, my name is Sherwin Lai. I'm the Interp captain in speech and debate at Bellarmine College Prep. Today I have a video about Program Oral Interp, or POI. Some people call this POI. I just say POI. Today I'll be introducing the basics of the event and what kind of skills you need, etc., etc. So first, the goal of POI is to perform pieces of literature that ultimately convey a specific theme or argument. So you want to come up with some kind of theme or something you're arguing for. It needs to be specific. So we wouldn't just do something like racism or sexism, right? Because that's kind of overly broad. We might instead pursue an argument like, what does it mean for a second-generation immigrant to deal with the expectations from their ancestors as well as their own dreams, right? Something like that is more specific in what we're trying to aim for. Now, unlike the other Interp events, in POI, you get to combine multiple pieces from different genres, and then you would craft these pieces or weave them together. I'll go over how to do that together to argue that theme. So again, you have an overarching controlling idea, I guess, for your argument, but then you take different pieces, put them together to convey that theme. So it involves multiple pieces. To differentiate between the different pieces, you would play a different kind of character for each piece as you switch between the pieces so people can kind of know where you're at in the piece. Usually, effective POIs mix both humor and drama. And even though we're using different pieces, the overarching piece has a large dramatic plot structure. So it's not like you're not going to have like 5 different climaxes for each different piece, but you're going to build and assemble the pieces together so that they all converge to a climax. Of course, you'd have a rising action, falling action, etc. And the unique thing about POI is you actually get to hold your script in your hand in a little black book called a binder. It's a black binder, I think 8.5 by 5.5 inches. And you actually get to use this binder as a prop. So I'll get into more of this later, but it's less of a thing from which you can read your script and more of a creative device for you to block with. So how do we find scripts? So one piece of advice I have, which may or may not work for everyone, but what I tend to do is I start with one piece that I like, and then I look for other pieces that complement that piece, and I pick based on that piece and based on those pieces, kind of figure out, okay, what do these convey? What kind of theme can I establish with these pieces? So I think it's less about figuring out the theme and then searching for pieces for it, but rather finding a piece you like, finding other pieces that go along with it, and then looking at those pieces and then determining what theme goes along with the pieces. So it's the other way around. You would need to combine a variety of genres. Poetry is especially important because it establishes a kind of rhythm for your piece. Slam poetry, I highly recommend that you use. Drama and plays, books and novels, anthologies. Web articles even are a useful device, especially if you're kind of trying to convey a social justice or identity theme. Web articles bring that relevance into it. And you might think it's kind of weird to perform a web article, but you can actually do that. And of course, both fiction or nonfiction are perfectly acceptable. But you definitely need to have at least some fiction. Check out the NSDA approved websites list for interpretation. So if your source is print published, it's legal. If it comes from the internet, it has to be from one of these sites on this list. So make sure you check with that before you start cutting. And of course, we want a balance of humor and drama. So here are a few rules of the event. So of course, like all other interps, you need a new theme and new pieces every season. So you can't reuse any of the pieces across the season, even if it's like, and I know POI has multiple pieces, so like all of the pieces you use in one season cannot be used in the next season. So I can't just like swap out like half of the pieces. That's not new. It has to be completely new theme. The sources need to be either print published or from the NSDA approved websites list I mentioned. You need to have a minimum of 2 different genres. So again, web article, news, article, poetry, prose, drama. Those are types of genres. You typically would have multiple characters. Again, a different distinct character for each piece. And it's really important to show the differences, substantial differences between those characters. Otherwise, judges will easily get confused on which piece you're at, because we're going to jump around between different pieces, right? And then the really important thing is make sure you purchase the binder with the manuscript, and you put your script inside the binder, right? But again, we're not going to be reading from the binder. We're using it as a prop to create blocking. For example, I can type on the computer. I would flip the binder over, and then it's kind of hard to demonstrate without me actually showing you, but you can do that. Or you can turn a binder into a microphone or a bird that flies, metaphorically, right? Those are different types of things. Our coaches and captains will definitely help you with that. So there's a lot of creativity involved. You will write a student written introduction. You will write an introduction, giving the context of your piece, kind of establishing that theme in the beginning. So this will be the part that you write. Everything else is from the pieces. So this is the only part that you actually write. 150 added words is the maximum. So words that don't come from the original scripts. And that includes the introduction, but doesn't include the list of titles and authors that you state in the introduction, because it's too long. And that's specific to POI, 10 minutes maximum. For you Latin scholars out there, the manuscript is really a pro forma device. It's just there, and you kind of like pretend like you're reading from it, and you dress the manuscript, but you have to memorize the script in order to be competitive. So de facto, in fact, or in actuality, you would need to memorize. Do not read from the script. The binder is a really useful and creative device for you to block with, and that's something that's really special and unique to this event. All right, so there's kind of two different approaches you can structure a POI. The first approach is you have one anchor piece, and then you visit each other piece once. So maybe it's like a poem or a song, usually, that you break up into sections and you put throughout the piece. And then I would perform like a small portion of the anchor piece, and then I would visit maybe piece A that I bring in. And then once I'm done with piece A, I won't come back to it later in the piece. And then I'll just go back to my anchor piece, piece B, anchor piece, piece C, anchor piece, piece D, etc., right? So only the anchor piece shows up multiple times, but all the other pieces only show up once. I think an advantage of this approach is that it's kind of easier to follow. People won't get as confused as which piece you're going to, but it is a more kind of rigid kind of structure, but it's the more common approach used in high school. The other approach, which is actually my personal preference, is to weave all the pieces together. So you would visit each piece multiple times. So I might go A, B, C, B, C, A, C, B, right? And I can go to each piece multiple times. And it's also known as college weave because it's used more in college forensics. Now, I want to warn you that if you choose to take this approach, which is a perfectly great approach, you have to make sure that all your characters and transitions are really clean and distinct. If two of your characters are even a little bit similar and people are not exactly sure which piece you're going to, it's going to create a lot of confusion in the long run, and it will not work out. So if you think you can maintain, those character differences clearly and still create that plot arc, choose approach 2. Another thing to note about approach 2 is it's easy to jump around too much, and then your plot arc becomes too complex. And remember that when we only have 10 minutes for the speech event, that plot arc needs to just be straightforward. Approach 1 facilitates that. Approach 2 allows you more flexibility and complexity, but again, you've got to make sure everything's super clean. Both of them are valid, for sure. Yeah, so regardless of which approach, the dramatic plot structure and story arc need to be there. As I've already said, you don't want 5 different arcs or 5 different dramatic plot structures for each piece. They all need to converge or be assembled and put together to create one overarching dramatic plot structure. And this is really important. You have the binder where you have like the pages in the binder. Every time you flip a page, that signals to the judge and the audience that you're going to a different piece. It's a super important transitionary element. And of course, your character would also need to change to indicate which piece you go to. So those page flips, you're not just flipping pages randomly, or like you only flip them when you go to a different piece, basically. Cool. Structure of a POI, similar to all other speech events. You start with a teaser, which I think is usually like you visit 2 to 3 different pieces in your POI first, and then you would close your binder and give your student written introduction that gives context about the speech, as well as state all the titles and authors and the name of your program or the topic that you're talking about. Then we go to the exposition, inciting incident, the rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. I'd say the inciting incident or the conflict needs to be really clear from the get-go as you're developing the theme. And oftentimes when you're cutting or putting together the piece, I would urge you to think about the climax first, where you're going to lead up to, and then work the rest of the piece around that climax. Yeah, and again, we're going to be visiting different pieces as we build through this structure. Few skills that you need for POI. First, the programming itself. Make sure your cutting is super well defined and that you're able to convey a specific argument. That's not just like racism is bad or toxic masculinity is a problem, right? Like, what about those things specifically? Can you tie in some kind of element of intersectionality, for example, right? Let's try to be more specific and relevant than just sexism and racism in general. We want distinct characterization, super important for POI, because if you start mixing your characters up or they start seeming similar, people will not know which piece you're at. It'll become a mess. The blocking needs to be super precise, especially with your binder. And I'll tell you, if your blocking is messy and sloppy, you will not break. So that's something we will really train you to work on. The binder tech obviously needs to be clean. It might seem easy to work with the binder, but once you actually try it in your hands, you'll notice that it's actually quite clunky and awkward to work with. So you really got to train and practice that binder work and the blocking that you use with the binder. Again, the binder is not just something for you to read your script from, but rather it is a tool for creativity. We want clear transitions and good flow. This is especially important since you're going to be switching between different pieces, and we cannot feel like a bump or disconnect every time we go from piece to piece. It just needs to flow smoothly with really clean transitions and distinct characterization. As with most other interps, you're going to need a dynamic range of emotions, energy levels, and intensity. We want to build to the climax, right? We want to show complex sets of emotions and different thoughts and feelings and processes of the characters, especially since you're visiting, again, multiple speeches or multiple pieces in your speech. Finally, we want to have excellent physical control, not only with your blocking, but even things like facial expressions, gestures, eyebrows, eyes need to be engaged. Blocking needs to be clean. Those finger movements with your binder need to be clean. That kind of stuff. This might seem like a lot, but trust me, this is really an event worth doing and something we will train you with and provide you the resources to succeed. Our coach and captains are highly qualified. They'll help you think of blocking ideas, work with the binder, make sure everything's clean. I will also say that in terms of the cutting process, POI is probably the most rigorous out of all the events because you're not just cutting one piece. You have to find multiple sources and then put that together to build. So do note that POI is a bit more work than what you might expect, but it is one of the most fun, most rewarding, most dynamic events that you can do in Interp. And as someone who's done it myself, I would highly, highly recommend it. And it really also sharpens your English skills and literary analysis skills as well, since you're putting together literature into a theme. I think I've rambled on for a bit too much, so I'm just going to leave that there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, ask your captains, ask your coach. But otherwise, that's about it for this video, and thank you so much for watching.